So I come back to the third part of the presentation, which is, I suppose, what I've called ownership issues. So we've looked at how HVAC works, why it's important. We've looked at some of the regulatory issues. Let's talk a little bit about some of the ownership or the management issues in no particular order. As Michelle mentioned, next week we'll try and stitch all this together into a process that looks at how you actually take this knowledge and improve management for better outcomes from a HVAC perspective. And that deals with obviously the technical, but it also deals with a lot of these ownership issues as well, because HVAC systems clearly sit in a commercial framework. So system performance, we talked before about how important system performance is. It's all great to say. In some buildings it's super important. If you're at 101 Collins Street and the temperature's not quite right, you'll have 15 lawyers on the phone before 7:30 in the morning or at 11:30 at night. In a lot of mid-tier buildings, you might never ever know because the tenants come and go and really don't care. So somewhere in between, you've got a situation where HVAC performance is important to you. And as facilities managers, property managers or owners, you'll have an idea about how important your HVAC is. Obviously it relates back to the whole cycle. You know, complaints, what you get from a rent perspective, where you end up in a vacancy perspective, if you like. It also relates back to lease conditions. Increasingly, buildings have clear expectations set out in contract around HVAC performance. The thing needs to do the job that's intended to do. It needs to provide comfortable, productive, safe and sustainable environments, because as I pointed out at the start, that's what we're in the business of selling. Really interesting question, just off to the side. System performance, HVAC system performance, how do you measure that? It's pretty tough to do, isn't it? From a regulatory performance perspective, we've talked about some of those regulatory requirements. This is really, in a built environment sense, some of many, many parts. Lots of people are attending for compliance. Lots of people are reporting. It's a real increasing cost in buildings. So how you better engage the supply chain and your maintenance providers and your property managers to ensure that the overall burden, if you like, around compliance is the least, if you like, is pretty important. You know, the truism of the supply chain is that suppliers push their costs up. So if the law changes and all of a sudden WorkSafe pretty much dictate that job's a two-person job, somebody has to hold the ladder these days, the labour costs associated with that's going to double, and so therefore that gets passed on to the property manager, which gets passed on to the owner. So if you put extra burdens in the building around inductions, around reporting, doubling up on things, again, you're adding the cost to the actual building itself, and somebody has to pay, and ultimately that gets passed up. So it's in everybody's best interest to understand what the requirements are and work out who's doing what in the most elegant way possible. I mentioned before fire testing. One of the most vexed areas around air conditioning is very much around making sure it will work in a fire mode sense. And air conditioning systems and their operation in fire mode can be very, very complex, and quite often in buildings this is not tested properly. And increasingly the regulators are looking at this, and again a little bit of a thing coming at us all in some ways.